night of September 30th, 1919, approximately 100 African Americans, mostly sharecroppers on the plantations of white landowners, attended a meeting of the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America at a church in Hoopspur, 3 miles north of Elaine, Arkansas. The purpose of the meeting was to obtain better payments for their cotton crops from the white plantation owners who dominated the area during the Jim Crow era. Upset about unfair low wages, they enlisted the help of a prominent white attorney from Little Rock, Ulysses Bratton, to come to Elaine to press for a fair share in the profits of their labor. Organizers hoped Bratton's presence would bring more pressure to bear through the courts. Aware of the dangers due to the racially motivated violence in the area, some of the farmers were armed with rifles. Around 11 p.m., the night of the massacre, a group of local white men, many being affiliated with local law enforcement, fired shots into the church. The shots were returned, and in the chaos, one white man was killed. Word spread quickly about the death, and rumors soon arose that the sharecroppers, who had formerly joined PFHUA, were leading an organized insurrection against the white residents of Phillips County. In reality, white Arkansans were fearful of what would happen if African Americans organized and took violent action, an unfortunate turn of events all too common in America during the early 20th century. Governor Charles Breaux called for 500 soldiers from nearby Camp Pike to, quote, round up the heavily armed Negroes. The troops were, quote, under order to shoot and kill any Negro who refused to surrender immediately. And they went well beyond that, banding together with local vigilantes and killing at least 200 African Americans. And the killing was indiscriminate. Men, women, and children, unfortunate enough to be in the vicinity, were slaughtered. During the massacre, Arkansan Leroy Johnston, who had nothing to do with the Union or the conflict in Elaine, was pulled from a train in Helena shortly after returning home and shot to death alongside his 3 brothers. Amidst the violence, 5 whites died, but for those deaths, someone would have to be held accountable. In the days after the bloodshed in Elaine, local media coverage continued to fan the flames daily, reporting sensational stories of an organized plot against whites. A 7-man committee formed to investigate the killings. Their conclusions, all too predictable. The following week, they issued a statement in the Arkansas Democrat declaring the gathering in Elaine a, quote, deliberately planned insurrection of the Negroes against the whites, led by the PFHUA, whose founders used, quote, ignorance and superstition of a race of children for monetary gains. Scores of the Union's members were charged with assault, murder, and night riding. 12 members were charged with capital murder and sentenced to death. The massacre and the sharecroppers sentenced to death drew the attention of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. Through grassroots efforts, the NAACP built support for the sharecroppers dubbed the Elaine 12 and raised money for their legal counsel. It was in the defense of the Elaine 12 that Scipio Jones, one of the lawyers for the 12, rose to national acclaim. Scipio Jones and the NAACP's defense team worked to free the 12 defendants, who were divided into Moore v. Dempsey and Ware v. Dempsey cases. On February 19, 1923, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a 6-2 decision in favor of the Moore's defendants, maintaining the 12 had been denied due process and noting the judicial proceedings had been influenced by a mob that had assembled outside the courthouse before the men were sentenced. Despite the favorable ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court, the Moore defendants remained in jail facing a retrial in district court. On November 3, 1923, Governor McRae commuted the death sentences of the sharecroppers to 12-year terms in prison, making them immediately eligible for parole. On January 13, 1925, the 6 more defendants were granted indefinite furloughs from McRae and were released from jail. For the Black victims and families of the Elaine Massacre, there was still no true justice, as no perpetrators of violence against them were ever prosecuted, nor were any charges ever filed. However, on September 29, 2019, a memorial to those who died during the massacre was dedicated in downtown Helena, and on November 5, 2019, the Elaine 12 were memorialized on the Arkansas Civil Rights Heritage Trail in Little Rock, Arkansas. And if you didn't know, now you know.